My brother and I were born 7 minutes apart on February 19th, 1968, in the back bedroom of a rented farmhouse outside Darrington, Washington. I came first. Jesse came second. Our mother, Janine Clark, was 23 years old and had refused to go to the hospital because she said the logging road was iced over and she wasn't going to die in a ditch over something women had been doing without doctors for 10,000 years. Our father, Ray Clark, paced the kitchen and boiled water because that's what men did in those days when a birth was happening and they had no idea how to help. A neighbor woman named Bev Miller served as midwife. She delivered calves and foals, and on 2 prior occasions, human babies, and she told our mother that twins were no different than singles, except there was more of everything. More blood, more noise, more worry. We were fraternal twins, not identical, but close enough in appearance that people who didn't know us well mixed us up constantly. We had the same sandy brown hair, the same wiry build, the same narrow jaw that came from our mother's side. Jesse's eyes were gray-green where mine were plain brown, and he was maybe half an inch taller by the time we were 5, but in matching clothes from a distance, we could pass for the same kid. Our mother dressed us in different colors so strangers could tell us apart. Blue for me, red for Jesse. And by the time we were 5, we'd figured out that we could swap shirts and fool most people, though never our father. He claimed he could tell us apart by the way we walked. "I put more weight on my heels," he said. Jesse led with his toes. We grew up on the North Cascades, in the wet green shadow of the rainforest, in a world that smelled like wood pulp and diesel, and the particular mineral sweetness of rivers fed by glacial melt. Our father worked for the Weyerhaeuser Mill in Darrington. Our mother waitressed at the Mountain View Cafe on the highway and took in mending on the side. We were not poor by the standards of Snohomish County in the early 70s, but we were close enough to poor that Christmas presents came from the Goodwill, and new shoes happened once a year in September, right before school started. The house was small, 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen with a wood stove that our father fed with scraps from the mill. Jesse and I shared a room with a window that looked out at the tree line, a wall of Douglas fir and western hemlock that began about 40 yards from our back door and continued, unbroken, into the Mount Baker Snoqualmie National Forest, and ultimately the interior of the Cascade Mountains, one of the most remote and least explored wilderness areas in the lower 48 states. I need to describe the forest because the forest is where this story lives and where it ends. And if you don't understand what the North Cascades forest is, you won't understand anything that happened to us. This is not a park. This is not a hiking trail with interpretive signs and a gift shop at the trailhead. The Seattle, the Sauk, the Cascade, these are old-growth forests that receive heavy rainfall and snowpack, with some of the most rugged terrain in the lower 48. The canopy is so dense that on overcast days, which is most days, the forest floor exists in a permanent green twilight. Moss grows on everything. Trees grow on top of fallen trees, which are themselves growing moss that hosts ferns, that host insects, that host entire micro-ecosystems invisible to the naked eye. The biomass per acre rivals anything in the Amazon. The silence is not really silence at all, but a living sound, dripping water, creaking wood, the rustle of things moving through undergrowth that you cannot see and probably do not want to. People disappear in the Cascade wilderness, not frequently, but consistently. Hikers, hunters, mushroom pickers, the occasional botanist or surveyor who wanders off a trail and is never seen again. The terrain is the obvious explanation. Ravines, deadfall, rivers that flood without warning, hypothermia that can set in at 50 degrees if you're wet enough and tired enough. But people from Darrington, people who grew up on the edge of that forest the way Jesse and I did, people who spent their childhoods playing in the first 100 yards of timber beyond their back fences. Those people knew there was something else in the woods, something that moved through the deepest valleys and the highest ridges with a purpose that was not animal and not quite human, something that left tracks in the mud along salmon streams and stripped bark from trees at heights that no bear could reach, and made sounds at night that traveled across miles of canopy and settled into your chest like a second heartbeat. The Sauk River people, whose reservation sits along the river north of Darrington, had a name for it. Several names, actually, depending on which elder you asked and which story they were telling. Our father, who was not Sauk River but who had worked alongside Sauk River loggers for years, told us one of those names once, sitting on the front porch after dinner on a summer evening when Jesse and I were maybe 6 years old. He said it quietly, like he was sharing something he wasn't sure he should share, and then he said that whatever it was, it had been in these woods longer than any of us, and the smartest thing to do was leave it alone. Jesse asked what it looked like. Our father took a long drag on his cigarette and said he didn't know and didn't want to. Jesse asked if it was dangerous. Our father said that anything big enough to pull the bark off a tree 8 feet up was dangerous if it wanted to be, but that from what he understood, it mostly didn't want to be. It mostly wanted to be left alone. He said the problem started when people didn't respect that. I remember the way the porch light caught the smoke from his cigarette, the way the tree line behind him was already dissolving into darkness, the way Jesse leaned forward with his chin on his knees and his eyes wide and fixed on our father's face, absorbing every word with the hunger of a boy who has just been told that the world contains more than he was led to believe. Jesse was always the more curious of the two of us. I was the cautious one, the planner, the boy who checked the weather before riding his bike. Jesse was the one who rode into the storm on purpose just to see what it felt like. That difference between us is the reason I'm sitting here telling you this story, and Jesse is not. On the morning of August 23, 1975, Jesse and I were 7 years old, and our mother dropped us off at the home of Rick and Donna Palmer for a weekend of what she called supervised outdoor adventure. Rick Palmer was our father's foreman at the mill, a big, quiet man in his mid-40s who had no children of his own and treated every kid in Darrington like a nephew. His wife Donna ran a small dog grooming business out of their garage and made the best blackberry cobbler on the North Cascades, a claim that was essentially undisputed within a 30-mile radius. The Palmers lived on 11 acres about 4 miles south of Darrington on the Sauk River Road, a gravel track that followed the river upstream into the national forest. Their property backed directly onto federal land. There was no fence, no marker, no visible boundary between the Palmers' backyard and several 100,000 acres of wilderness. The plan was simple. Rick was going to take Jesse and me and 2 other boys from town, Steve Clark, no relation to us, and a kid named Bobby White, on an overnight camping trip about 2 miles upriver from the Palmer property, a spot Rick knew well, a flat bench above the Sauk where the fishing was good and the ground was dry enough to pitch a tent. We'd hike in Saturday morning, fish all day, sleep in tents, hike back out Sunday afternoon. Our mother signed a permission slip that Rick had written out on a piece of notebook paper. Our father shook Rick's hand and told him to make sure we wore our rain gear. We set out at 9 in the morning under a sky that couldn't decide if it was going to rain or just threatened to. Rick carried the big pack with the tent and the cooking gear of old-growth spruce and carpets of sword, fern that came up to my chest. The river was low for August, running clear and green over a bed of smooth gray stones, and you could see steelhead holding in the deeper pools, dark shapes finning against the current, like thoughts that hadn't quite formed into words. Jesse walked ahead of me. He always walked ahead. He was faster, more eager, always wanting to see what was around the next bend. Rick let him lead as long as he stayed within sight, and Jesse mostly obeyed, though he had a habit of disappearing around a curve in the trail and then reappearing 30 seconds later, grinning as if the brief invisibility was itself the adventure. Steve and Bobby walked behind me, trading a bag of sunflower seeds back and forth and arguing about whether the Seattle Seahawks were going to be any good in their first season, which wouldn't start for another year but was already the most important topic in Western Washington. We reached the campsite around 11. It was everything Rick had promised. A flat clearing about 50 feet above the river with a fire ring made of river stones and a view upstream toward the foothills that still had snow on their tops even in late summer. We set up the tent, a canvas army surplus affair that smelled like mothballs and old rain, and then Rick took us down to the river to fish. I need to slow down here because the next few hours are the last normal hours of my childhood, and they deserve to be remembered the way they happened, which was beautifully. We fished the Sauk with spinning rods that Rick had brought for us, and Jesse caught a 12-inch rainbow trout on his third cast, and his face when he held it up was pure, uncomplicated joy, the kind of joy that only exists before you learn that the world can take things from you without warning or explanation. Bobby fell in the river up to his waist and had to sit by the fire in his underwear while his jeans dried on a stick. Steve found a crawdad the size of his hand and chased all of us with it until Rick told him to put it back. We ate peanut butter sandwiches and drank orange Kool-Aid mixed in a canteen. And Rick told us stories about working in the mill, about logs so big you could drive a truck through the hollow center, about the time a cougar walked through the lumberyard at shift change, and every man in the place climbed onto the nearest stack of boards. That evening, we roasted hot dogs over the fire and watched the light drain out of the sky in layers, gold to pink to purple to a deep blue-black that settled over the forest like a lid being placed on a pot. The stars came out in clusters. The river made its constant sound, that particular rushing murmur that is the closest thing to a lullaby that nature produces. Rick told us that this stretch of the Sauk was one of the last places in Washington where the forest had never been logged, that some of the trees around us were over 500 years old, and that if you put your hand on the bark of a Douglas fir that old, you were touching something that was alive when Columbus sailed. Jesse put his hand on the nearest tree. He pressed his palm flat against the bark and closed his eyes and stood there for maybe 10 seconds. And when he opened them, he looked out into the darkness beyond the firelight with an expression I couldn't read. I asked him what he was doing. He said he was listening. I asked him to what? He said he didn't know, but something was out there, and it was listening back. Rick told us it was time for bed. We crawled into the tent and arranged ourselves in our sleeping bags, 4 boys in a row with Rick on the end nearest the door. The fire crackled down outside. The river kept its rhythm. Somewhere upstream, an owl called. 2 low notes repeated at intervals so regular it could have been a metronome. I fell asleep quickly, the way 7-year-olds do when their bodies are tired and their stomachs are full and the world feels temporarily like a safe and comprehensible place. I woke up in the dark, not slowly, not the gradual surfacing of normal waking, but all at once like a switch being thrown. My eyes were open and I was fully alert, and I knew immediately that something was wrong, though I couldn't identify what. The tent was dark. The fire outside had burned to coals, and the faint orange glow that leaked through the canvas was barely enough to see by. I could hear Rick breathing to my left, deep and regular. I could hear Bobby making small sounds in his sleep, the kind of half-words that kids mutter during dreams. I could hear Steve shifting in his bag. I could not hear Jesse. I reached out to my right, where Jesse's sleeping bag was, and my hand found empty nylon, cool to the touch. He'd been gone long enough for his body heat to dissipate. I sat up and felt around in the darkness, thinking maybe he'd rolled off his bag, maybe he'd shifted to the other side of the tent. He hadn't. He wasn't in the tent. I unzipped the door and looked outside. The clearing was silver with moonlight. The fire was a mound of gray ash with a few orange embers glowing at its base. The river gleamed beyond the bank. The forest stood in a dark wall on three sides, trees rising into shadow, their trunks like columns in a cathedral that had no ceiling, only more darkness above. Jesse was standing at the edge of the clearing. He was in his pajamas, the red flannel ones with the western boot pattern that our mother had bought at the Sears in Marysville. He was barefoot. He was facing the tree line, perfectly still, and in the moonlight he looked like a photograph, like something captured in a single moment and held there. I whispered his name. He didn't turn. I said it louder. Nothing. I got out of the tent and walked toward him, my bare feet on cold ground, and as I got closer, I could see that his eyes were open but fixed on a point in the forest that I couldn't identify. His arms were at his sides. His breathing was slow and even, like someone in a trance or a very deep daydream. I grabbed his arm. His skin was cold, much colder than it should have been for a summer night, and when I touched him, he turned his head and looked at me, and his expression was not fear and not confusion. It was something closer to wonder. He said, "Do you hear it?" I listened. The river, the wind, the smallest whisper of something moving in the canopy, a branch adjusting under its own weight, a bird resettling on its perch. "Hear what?" I said. "The humming," he said. "It's been going for a long time. It comes from over there." He pointed into the forest, toward the uphill slope that rose behind the campsite, into terrain I couldn't see in the darkness. "It sounds like singing, but it isn't words. It's just a sound, a low sound, like someone holding one note for a really long time." I didn't hear anything. I told him so. He looked at me with an expression I had never seen on his face, a mixture of pity and excitement, the look of someone who has been let in on a secret and realizes the other person hasn't been. "You don't hear it because you're not listening right," he said. "You have to listen with your chest, not your ears." I had no idea what that meant. I told Jesse he needed to come back to the tent, that Rick was going to be upset if he found us outside in the middle of the night. And Jesse looked at the forest one more time and then turned and walked back with me without arguing, which was unlike him. He got into his sleeping bag and lay on his back with his eyes open, staring at the canvas ceiling. And the last thing he said before I fell back asleep was, "It knows we're here, Billy. It's been watching us all day." The next morning was overcast and cool, and Jesse was the first one awake, already dressed and sitting by the dead fire, when Rick unzipped the tent at 6:30. Rick asked Jesse how long he'd been up, and Jesse said since before dawn. Rick asked if he'd been outside by himself, and Jesse said no, even though I knew he had been, or at least that he'd been outside during the night. I didn't correct him. Twins protect each other's secrets. That's one of the rules you learn without anyone teaching it to you. We ate oatmeal with brown sugar and drank powdered milk mixed with river water that Rick boiled over the rebuilt fire. Jesse was quiet during breakfast, which was unusual. Normally he was the loudest voice at any table, the one telling jokes, the one doing impressions of teachers and cartoon characters. That morning he ate his oatmeal and watched the tree line the way a dog watches a door it expects to open. After breakfast, Rick said we'd fish for another couple of hours and then pack up and hike out. The weather was turning, he said. He could smell rain coming, and the Sauk could come up fast if it rained hard enough. And he didn't want to be on the wrong side of a rising river with 4 boys who couldn't swim across it. We went down to the river, and Jesse asked Rick if he could fish upstream, around the next bend, where there was a deep pool he'd spotted the day before. Rick said as long as he stayed within shouting distance and didn't go past the big deadfall spruce that lay across the river, about 200 yards upstream. Jesse said he would. He took his rod and walked upstream along the bank, and I watched him go, and something in my stomach tightened. Not from fear exactly, but from the awareness that Jesse was moving toward the forest with a purpose that had nothing to do with fishing. 20 minutes passed, maybe 30. Rick was helping Bobby untangle a bird's nest in his reel, and Steve was skipping rocks, and I was sitting on a boulder with my line in the water, catching nothing and thinking about what Jesse had said in the night. The humming. Listening with your chest. I tried it. I sat very still and tried to feel sound instead of hear it, tried to let whatever Jesse was sensing reach me through some channel I hadn't known existed. I felt nothing. Just the cold of the boulder through my jeans and the pull of the current against my line and the ordinary sounds of water and wind and a forest that was, as far as my senses could determine, exactly what it appeared to be. Then Rick stood up and called Jesse's name. He called it twice, loud enough to carry over the river noise. No answer. He told the three of us to stay put and walked upstream along the bank, moving quickly, his boots crunching on gravel. He rounded the bend and disappeared. He came back 3 minutes later and his face was different, not panicked. Rick was not a man who panicked, but his jaw was set and his eyes were doing the rapid scanning movement of someone whose brain is processing a situation that doesn't match any of the patterns it knows. Jesse's not up there, he said. His rod's on the bank, but he's not there. He told me to call for Jesse. Twins have a way of calling each other that carries something beyond the sound, an urgency, a frequency, whatever you want to call it. I stood on the bank and screamed my brother's name until my throat was raw. I screamed it upstream and downstream and into the forest on both sides of the river. The trees absorbed the sound the way they absorb everything, swallowing it into their mass, returning nothing. Rick organized a search. He put Steve and Bobby in the tent with instructions not to move, and then he and I walked the upstream bank to the deadfall and beyond, calling Jesse's name every 30 seconds. We searched the riverbank for tracks and found Jesse's footprints in the silt leading to the deep pool, clear impressions of his sneakers in the wet sand. The prints approached the water, stopped, and then turned away from the river towards the tree line. At the edge of the trees, Jesse's sneaker prints crossed onto the forest floor, where the ground was soft with decades of accumulated duff. For the first 20 feet, the prints were normal. A 7-year-old boy walking steadily into the timber. Then they changed, not joined by another set, changed. The stride lengthened, the impressions deepened, and alongside Jesse's sneaker tracks, spaced about 3 feet to the left and slightly ahead, there was a series of depressions in the duff, circular, evenly spaced, pressed down with significant weight, not footprints, knuckle prints. Something had been walking beside my brother on all fours, close enough to touch him, matching his pace, guiding him deeper into the forest the way a sheepdog guides a lamb. The knuckle prints were each the size of a man's fist, but sunk 2 inches into ground that barely registered Jesse's weight. Whatever made them was enormous, low to the ground, and moving with a deliberateness that had nothing to do with pursuit. Rick crouched over those impressions for a long time without speaking. He touched one with his fingertip and then pulled his hand back as if the ground were hot. When he stood up, his face had gone through something, a rearrangement, and what settled into place behind his eyes was not confusion. It was recognition, the kind that comes with dread attached, because recognizing something means you already knew it was possible, and knowing it was possible means you've been carrying that knowledge longer than you wanted to admit. He said something under his breath, a word in the Sauk language that I won't reproduce here because it was shared with him in confidence and I don't believe it was meant for wider circulation. But the meaning roughly was the one who walks low and leads. I asked him what we should do. He looked at me, and for the first time in my life, I saw an adult who had no answer. He said we were going back to the tent, we were packing up, and we were hiking out to the road as fast as we could, and he was going to call the sheriff from the first phone he could find. I asked him, what about Jesse? He said the sheriff would send a search team. I said we couldn't leave Jesse. He put his hands on my shoulders and crouched down so his face was level with mine, and he said, Billy, what took your brother is not something you and I can get back from. We need people. We need a lot of people. The hike out took 45 minutes at a pace that had Steve and Bobby nearly running to keep up. Rick carried my pack along with his own because I was crying too hard to manage the straps. The weight of the realization was settling on me in waves. Jesse was gone. Something had taken him from the riverbank, something that left prints in the mud that were not human and not animal, and he had gone with it or been taken by it. And I was walking away from him, and every step I took in the wrong direction felt like a betrayal that I would carry for the rest of my life. Rick flagged down a logging truck on the Sauk Road and used the driver's CB radio to call for help. Within 2 hours, the Snohomish County Sheriff's Department had a search team on the ground. By evening, there were 40 people in the woods, deputies and volunteer firefighters and loggers who knew the terrain, and fish and wildlife officers, and 3 tracking dogs from a kennel in Snohomish. They searched the riverbank. They found the prints. I watched from the road as a deputy named Tom Walker photographed them with a Polaroid camera and then stood there staring at the pictures with an expression I recognized because it was the same expression Rick had worn, the face of a man encountering something his training hadn't covered. The search continued for 6 days. Helicopters flew grid patterns over the canopy. Ground teams pushed into the forest along every game trail and drainage within a 5-mile radius of the campsite. They found Jesse's left sneaker on the second day, sitting upright on a moss-covered log about 1.5 miles from the river, as if it had been carefully placed there rather than lost. They found what appeared to be a sleeping impression in a patch of ferns on the third day, a flattened area roughly the size and shape of a child's body, surrounded by larger depressions that the tracking dogs circled and whined at, but refused to follow. On the 4th day, the dogs lost all scent trails. Every single one. The handlers said it was as if Jesse and whatever had taken him had simply ceased to exist at a certain point in the forest. No tracks, no scent, no broken vegetation, no fibers, nothing. The forest had closed behind them like water closing over a stone. The official report classified Jesse as a missing person, presumed victim of a wilderness accident. The prints were not mentioned. The sneaker placement was not mentioned. The dog's refusal to track was attributed to environmental conditions affecting scent dispersal. The case was filed and within a year functionally forgotten by everyone except our family, the Palmers, and a small circle of people in Darrington who knew what those prints meant and were afraid to say it out loud. Our mother stopped working at the Mountain View Cafe. She stopped leaving the house. She sat in the bedroom that Jesse and I had shared and stared at his empty bed and his clothes in the closet and his collection of Hot Wheels cars lined up on the windowsill, and spoke to him as if he were still there, as if he had just stepped into the next room and would be back any minute. Our father drank. He drank before Jesse disappeared, the way most mill workers drank, a few beers after shift, a bottle on the weekends, but after August of '75, the drinking became the structure around which his entire life was organized. He went to work, he came home, he drank until he fell asleep, and the next morning he did it again. He never spoke about Jesse. If someone mentioned Jesse's name, our father would leave the room, and if he couldn't leave the room, He would leave the conversation by going somewhere behind his eyes where no one could follow. I grieved differently. I went silent. Teachers at Darrington Elementary noted in my file that Billy Clark, previously a social and engaged student, had become withdrawn and unresponsive following the disappearance of his twin brother. I was sent to a school counselor, a woman named Mrs. Green, who had a poster of a kitten hanging from a branch with the word perseverance underneath it, and she asked me to draw pictures of my feelings. I drew the forest, every time, just the forest, trees and shadow and a path leading in that had no path leading out. The truth is that I was not simply grieving, I was listening. Every night, lying in the bedroom that now held only one bed because our mother had moved Jesse's to the garage so she would stop waking up and reaching for him in the dark, I pressed my face against the window that faced the tree line, and I tried to do what Jesse had described. Listen with my chest. Feel what was out there instead of hearing it. For months, I felt nothing. Then, in the winter of 1975, on a night when the rain was coming down so hard, it sounded like the house was inside a waterfall, I felt something, not a sound, a presence, a weight in the darkness beyond the glass that was not the weight of rain or wind or trees, but the weight of attention. Something was out there, and it was aware of me, and the awareness was not hostile. It was patient. It was sad. And underneath the sadness, there was something else. Something I can only describe as an invitation, extended without words and without urgency, an open hand in the dark offering something I was too young and too afraid to accept. I pulled the curtain shut and hid under my covers, and I did not look out that window again for almost 2 years. Life reorganized itself around the absence. Our father left in 1977, walked out on a Tuesday morning and drove to Alaska to work the pipeline and sent money for a while and then stopped. Our mother held on longer, but the grief had hollowed her out, and by 1979, she was living with her sister in Olympia, and I was staying with Rick and Donna Palmer, who had volunteered to take me in and who treated me with a gentleness that I am not sure I deserved, but am grateful for in a way that words can't properly represent. Rick never talked about what he saw at the river. Not with me, not with anyone I knew about. But there was a night in the winter of '78 when I was doing homework at the kitchen table, and Rick was sitting in his chair by the wood stove, and the wind was driving rain against the windows in sheets, and I heard something outside, a vocalization, deep, resonant, carrying across the distance with a clarity that defied the storm. It was not a coyote, not an elk, not any sound I had learned in my 10 years on the North Cascades. Rick heard it too. He stood up, walked to the window, looked out for a long time, and then sat back down. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. The look on his face told me that whatever he'd seen at the riverbank in '75, whatever knowledge had settled into him that day, had never left, and that sound from the forest had just confirmed it all over again. I grew up with Rick and Donna. I went to Darrington High School. I played basketball, worked at the grocery store on weekends, dated a girl named Michelle White for most of junior year. I was, by every external measure, a normal kid living a normal life in a small logging town on the edge of the world. But there was a hollow place inside me where Jesse had been. A silence shaped exactly like my brother, and no amount of normalcy could fill it. I thought about him constantly, where he was, whether he was alive, what had happened in the hours and days after something walked him off that riverbank and into the trees. The sheriff had told our parents that the most likely scenario was an animal attack with no remains recovered due to scavenger activity, which was the polite, clinical way of saying they believed Jesse had been killed and eaten by a bear or a cougar. But that explanation didn't account for the prints. It didn't account for the carefully placed sneaker. It didn't account for the sleeping impression in the ferns, surrounded by depressions that suggested Something large had lain next to something small, the way a parent lies next to a child. And it didn't account for what happened on October 7th, 1982, 7 years and 45 days after Jesse disappeared. I was 17. It was a Tuesday. I was in my room at the Palmer's house after school, working on an English paper about the old man in the sea that I was profoundly unqualified to write, when Donna called me to the front door. Her voice had a quality I'd never heard before, a thinness, as if the words were being squeezed through a space too narrow for them. I walked to the front of the house, and Donna was standing in the open doorway with her hand over her mouth, and standing on the porch in the rain was a boy. He was thin, rail thin, the kind of thin that suggests not starvation, but a body accustomed to burning everything it takes in. His hair was long, past his shoulders, matted and tangled, and the color of dark copper. He was barefoot. He was wearing what appeared to be clothing made from animal hide, a rough shirt and leggings that were stitched together with sinew or something like it, and over that, draped across his shoulders like a shawl, a piece of fur that looked like it had come from a bear or possibly an elk. His skin was deeply tanned and covered in small scars, scratches and nicks that told the story of years spent moving through dense brush without protection. Not unpleasant, but was definitively not unpleasant, but was definitively not the scent of a person who lived in a house. He was looking at me, and I was looking at him. And even though 7 years had passed, even though he was taller and thinner and more weathered than any 14-year-old should be, even though nothing about his appearance matched the brother I had last seen on the bank of the Sauk, in a red flannel pajama shirt, I knew him. I knew him the way you know your own blood, the way you know a voice that has been part of the background noise of your existence since before you were born. The way a twin knows the other twin, not through appearance, because 7 years in the wild had changed him beyond recognition, but through something deeper, a pull in the gut, a vibration behind the sternum, the feeling of a missing piece of yourself suddenly occupying space in a room, displacing the air, making the emptiness you'd learned to live with suddenly intolerable because you remembered what full felt like. Jesse was alive. Jesse was standing on the Palmer's porch. Jesse had come back. And the look on his face, the look in those gray-green eyes that matched mine exactly, was not the look of a boy who had been rescued. It was the look of a boy who had been sent. Rick called the sheriff. Donna wrapped Jesse in a quilt and sat him at the kitchen table and put a glass of milk and a plate of toast in front of him. And Jesse looked at the toast like he was trying to remember what it was. He picked it up, sniffed it, bit off a corner, and chewed slowly, his eyes moving around the kitchen with the careful scanning attention of someone cataloging every surface and object in an unfamiliar environment. He drank the milk in one long pull, then set the glass down and wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. And the gesture was so precisely like our father's gesture, the same motion, the same angle of the wrist, that Donna made a small sound and had to leave the room. I sat across from him. Neither of us spoke for a long time. I was afraid that if I said the wrong thing, if I moved too quickly or asked the wrong question, he would bolt, the way a wild animal bolts when it realizes the space it's entered has walls. He didn't look afraid. He looked alert. His eyes tracked every sound, the refrigerator compressor cycling on, the clock ticking on the wall above the stove, the rain on the roof. When a car passed on the road outside, his whole body stiffened, and his hand gripped the edge of the table hard enough to whiten his knuckles. Finally, I said his name. Just his name. Jesse. And something in his face changed, softened, as if the word had unlocked a door that had been closed for 7 years. He looked at me and said, in a voice that was raspy and low and sounded like it hadn't been used for speech in a very long time, "Billy, you got bigger." I laughed. I couldn't help it. It was such an ordinary thing to say, such a perfectly normal observation from a brother who hadn't seen you in 7 years, and the normalcy of it broke something open in me. I laughed, and then I was crying, hard, the kind of crying I hadn't done since the week he disappeared, and Jesse watched me cry with a patience that seemed practiced, as if he had learned to wait out strong emotions the way you wait out a rainstorm, knowing it will pass. The sheriff arrived within the hour. Deputy Tom Walker, the same man who had photographed the prints by the Sauk in '75, walked into the Palmer's kitchen and stopped dead when he saw Jesse. He stood in the doorway for a full 10 seconds without moving. Then he took off his hat, sat down at the table, and pulled out a notepad. And what followed was the strangest interview I have ever witnessed. Jesse could speak. His English was functional but halting, delivered in short sentences with long pauses between them, as if he was translating from another language in his head before each utterance. He spoke with an accent that Walker couldn't place, a cadence that was unlike any regional dialect in the Pacific Northwest, marked by unusual emphasis on certain vowels and a tendency to drop articles. He said, "went to river" instead of "went to the river." He said, "was dark, very cold" instead of "it was dark and very cold." It was the speech pattern of someone who had learned language in isolation, maintaining the skeleton of English while losing the connective tissue. Walker asked Jesse where he'd been. Jesse said, "In the forest, with them." Walker asked who them was. Jesse looked at me, then at Walker, then at the window where rain was streaking down the glass in silver threads, and he said, "The family, the ones who live in the deep part where the trees don't end." Walker wrote this down without expression. He asked Jesse what happened the morning he disappeared from the campsite. Jesse said he'd heard something calling from the forest, a sound like humming that he could feel in his ribs, and he'd followed it because it didn't feel dangerous. It felt like being called by name, except it wasn't a name, it was a feeling. He said he walked into the trees, following the sound, and after a little while, he saw one of them standing in the shadows between two very large spruce. He said it was tall, much taller than Rick, and covered in dark reddish-brown hair, and its face was wide and flat with deep-set eyes that reflected the light, the way a cat's eyes reflect the light, and it was making the humming sound with its mouth closed, the sound coming from its chest, vibrating through the air like something you could touch. He said it looked at him. He said it knelt down, slowly, the way you kneel down to meet a child at their level, and it extended one hand, palm up, and the hand was enormous, as wide as Jesse's entire torso, and the fingers were thick and dark, and the palm was lighter, almost pink, and the gesture was unmistakable. It was offering to take him somewhere. Jesse said he took the hand. He said it felt warm, warmer than any human skin he'd ever touched, and rough, like bark. He said the creature stood and walked, and Jesse walked with it, and they moved through the forest at a pace that Jesse couldn't have maintained on his own, but somehow did, as if the creature's grip was transferring something, energy or intention or simple momentum, through their connected hands. Walker asked where they went. Jesse said they walked for a long time, uphill, through places where the trees were so old and so large that the forest floor was almost bare, nothing growing in the shadow of their canopy, just a carpet of brown needles and the occasional shelf of fungus, glowing pale in the gloom. He said they crossed rivers and climbed ridges and moved through terrain that had no trails, no markers, no sign that any human had ever passed through it. He said that by the time they stopped, it was dark, and they were somewhere in the interior of the mountains, in a valley that Jesse could not locate on any map because he had never seen a map of where they went. He said there were others, not one creature, a group. Jesse counted 7 the first night, though over the years the number varied. Adults and juveniles, 2 that were clearly older, larger, with silver-streaked hair and a slowness to their movements that suggested age. Several that were younger, faster, more curious, more willing to approach Jesse and examine him with their hands and noses. And one very small one, an infant, carried on the chest of a female in a way that was indistinguishable from the way a human mother carries a baby. Deputy Walker stopped writing. He set his pen down and looked at Jesse for a long time. And then he looked at me, and then he looked at Rick, who was standing in the doorway to the kitchen with his arms crossed and his face the color of old cement. Walker picked up his pen again and said, "Son, I need you to tell me exactly what happened to you out there." "All of it," Jesse told him. Over the next 3 hours, with the rain hammering the roof and the kitchen growing dark as the afternoon light failed and Donna turning on lamps one by one, Jesse described 7 years of living in the Cascade wilderness with a group of creatures that mainstream science said did not exist. They sheltered in natural formations, rock overhangs, cave systems, dense thickets of old-growth timber where fallen trees created enclosed spaces that were surprisingly warm and dry. They moved seasonally, following patterns that Jesse eventually recognized as tracking food sources, salmon runs, berry patches, elk herds, the fruiting cycles of specific mushroom species. They were not nomadic in the way that implies randomness. Their movements were deliberate and cyclical, following routes that Jesse believed had been used for generations, paths worn into the landscape, not by feet, but by time, by the accumulated intention of a species that had been navigating this terrain longer than any human civilization had existed on the continent. They ate what the forest provided, roots, berries, tubers that Jesse learned to dig with a stick shaped for that purpose. Mushrooms, but only certain species, and the adults were careful about which ones they gave to Jesse, inspecting each one and sometimes discarding fungi that looked identical to edible varieties, suggesting a knowledge of mycology that was precise and inherited. Fish caught from streams with bare hands, a technique that Jesse said involved standing motionless in shallow water for extraordinary lengths of time, waiting for a trout or salmon to drift within reach, and then closing a hand around it with a speed that Jesse's eyes could barely follow. Meat, occasionally, elk or deer, but never killed casually. Jesse described what he called a ritual, though he acknowledged the word might be wrong. Before a hunt, the adults would sit together in a circle and vocalize, a low, sustained harmonic that rose and fell in patterns too complex to be random, and the sound would carry through the forest in a way that Jesse said felt like the trees were participating, amplifying the sound, carrying it outward in all directions. He believed, though he could not prove it, that this was communication, that they were telling the forest what they needed and asking permission, and the forest was answering. Jesse learned their language, not all of it and not quickly. Their communication system was not purely vocal. It involved facial expressions, body posture, hand gestures, and what Jesse could only describe as a kind of emotional broadcasting, a capacity to project feelings, fear, calm, hunger, affection, curiosity, in a way that didn't require sound and could be perceived by anyone close enough to feel it. The vocal component was layered. They could produce sounds at frequencies that overlapped human hearing and sounds that were below it, felt in the body rather than heard by the ear. The infrasonic range was where most of their complex communication happened, Jesse said. What sounded like simple grunts or hums to a human ear was, to them, a dense language of tone, duration, and resonance that conveyed information with a subtlety that English couldn't match. Jesse told Walker that they had a name for themselves. He reproduced it, or tried to. The sound that came out of his mouth was low, vibrato, sustained for about 3 seconds, and seemed to originate from somewhere deeper in his body than the throat. It was not a human sound. Walker's pen had stopped moving. He said they knew about humans. They avoided us deliberately and with great skill. They knew our roads, our trails, our camps, our schedules. They knew when the logging crews would be in which drainages and when the hikers would be on which trails. They adjusted their movements accordingly, staying always one valley ahead, one ridge above, one drainage over from wherever humans were likely to be. Jesse said they regarded us with a mixture of caution and something he interpreted as pity, the way you might regard a relative who had inherited a large house but was systematically destroying it, room by room, without understanding what they had. Walker asked the question that was sitting on everyone's tongue. Why did they take you? Jesse's answer was the part that changed everything for me, that rewired the circuitry of my understanding and set me on the path that has led me, 44 years later, to tell you this story. Jesse said that on the night before our camping trip, the night we slept in our room in Darrington with the window facing the tree line, one of them had come close to the house, close enough to see through the window, close enough to smell us. And it had recognized something, not in me, in Jesse. It had detected something in Jesse's scent, something chemical and biological and specific that marked him as not entirely belonging to the world inside the house. Jesse said they told him, in their way over the years, through the slow accumulation of shared language and shared experience, that he carried something in his body that was partly theirs, that the humming he heard, the sound that drew him to the forest, was a frequency that only their kind could hear, a signal embedded in their vocalizations that resonated with something genetic, something inherited, something that existed in Jesse's cells, but not, apparently, in mine. We were fraternal twins, Jesse and I. We shared a birthday and a womb, but only about half our DNA, the same as any pair of siblings. That's the thing about fraternal twins that people forget. You can look alike, grow up in the same house, eat the same food, breathe the same air, and still be carrying fundamentally different genetic blueprints. Whatever Jesse carried, whatever genetic echo of their species, had found its way into our bloodline. The coin flip of conception had landed differently for each of us. Jesse got the sequence. I didn't. We were brothers, as close as two people can be, and yet the difference between us was absolute, invisible to every instrument except the one that had come to our window that night and listened to our sleeping bodies and heard, in one of them, a note of kinship that the other did not produce. They chose Jesse because Jesse was partly theirs. They left me because I was entirely ours. I want to be precise about what Jesse told Deputy Walker next, because it is the part of this story that I have carried the longest and that has cost me the most sleep, and I need you to hear it exactly as he said it. Jesse said that during his 7 years in the forest, he was not a prisoner. He was not restrained, confined, or prevented from leaving. He was cared for. He was fed, sheltered, protected from predators and weather, and the countless dangers of living in a wilderness that kills experienced adults with reliable efficiency. The older female, the one he came to understand, was the matriarch of the group, treated him with a tenderness that Jesse described as indistinguishable from a mother's love. She groomed him. She slept next to him. She positioned herself between Jesse and any perceived threat, whether it was a black bear at a berry patch or a lightning storm, or one of the younger males who occasionally expressed territorial aggression. She taught him which plants were edible and which would make him sick. She carried him when he was too tired to walk, and she could walk for 12 hours through mountains without rest. Jesse said he tried to leave twice. The first time was in his 2nd year, when the accumulated weight of loneliness and confusion and homesickness overwhelmed him, and he walked downhill toward where he thought the road might be. He walked for most of a day before the matriarch found him. She did not grab him. She did not restrain him. She sat down in front of him and made a sound that Jesse said was the saddest thing he had ever heard, a vocalization so suffused with grief that it made the air feel heavy, and then she waited. She waited for Jesse to decide. He stood there in the forest with the rain falling through the canopy and the light filtering through the branches in shafts of green and gold. And he looked at this creature who had fed him and warmed him and protected him, and he turned around and walked back. The second time was in his 5th year. He got farther, nearly to the Sauk River, close enough to hear the distant sound of a truck on a road, close enough to smell exhaust. But one of the younger males intercepted him, and this one was not as gentle as the matriarch. This one stood in his path, fully upright, over 8 feet tall, with its shoulders squared and its arms slightly away from its body, in a posture that radiated authority and something close to anger, and it made a sound that Jesse felt in his teeth, a deep, percussive bark that compressed the air between them. And Jesse understood that this was a boundary, that the group's tolerance for his wandering had limits. He went back again. He lived with them for 7 years. He learned their rhythms, their roots, their relationships. He learned to read the forest the way they read it, as a living system of interconnected signals, each element communicating with every other element in a continuous exchange of information. He learned that they buried their dead in deep soil under cairns of rock, with vocalizations that lasted for hours and that Jesse could only describe as singing, though the word felt inadequate. He learned that they were intelligent, not in the way that humans measure intelligence, through language and tool use and the manipulation of the physical world, but in a way that was oriented toward understanding rather than control. They understood the forest. They understood weather patterns, animal behavior, water systems, geological processes. They understood these things not through study, but through presence, through thousands of years of living inside the system they were part of. And their intelligence was the intelligence of a species that had never separated itself from the world it inhabited. And then, in October of 1982, the matriarch did something that Jesse did not expect. She woke him before dawn, led him to the edge of the group's territory, and walked him downhill. For hours, through terrain Jesse recognized from years of living in it, valleys and ridges and drainages he had names for in their language, but not in English. They walked until the forest thinned and the trees grew smaller and younger, second growth replacing old growth, a sure sign of proximity to human activity. They walked until Jesse could smell wood smoke and hear the distant sound of a generator, and then the matriarch stopped. She crouched in front of him. She put her hands on his shoulders, and her hands were so large that her fingers wrapped almost entirely around his upper arms. She looked at his face for a long time, and Jesse said her eyes were brown with flecks of gold, and the expression in them was not the blank expression of an animal, but the complex, layered expression of a being experiencing multiple emotions simultaneously, love and loss and fear and resolution, all existing together in a single gaze. She made a sound. Jesse reproduced it for Walker, and it was a low, sustained note that wavered slightly, like a voice on the edge of breaking. Then she stood up, turned, and walked back into the forest. She did not look back. Jesse stood there and watched her disappear into the trees, into the green and the shadow and the silence, and he understood that he had been returned, not rescued, not released, returned, sent back to the world he came from by someone who loved him because it was time. He said the reason was this: he was 14, he was becoming an adult, or beginning to. And the matriarch understood, in whatever way her species understood such things, that Jesse's future was not in the forest, that whatever part of him belonged to them was real but insufficient, that the majority of what he was, the majority of his body and his brain and his capacity and his potential belonged to the human world, and keeping him from it any longer would be a harm she was not willing to commit. She kept him as long as she could. She returned him when she had to. The reason was not cruelty. The reason was that she loved him too much to keep him from where he belonged. Walker filled 11 pages of his notepad. When Jesse was finished talking, the kitchen was dark except for the lamp over the table, and the rain had stopped. And the silence that filled the house was the particular silence that follows a revelation that no one in the room knows how to process. Walker closed his notepad and told Rick that he was going to file a report classifying Jesse as a recovered missing person, and that the details of Jesse's account would be included for the record, but that he could not personally verify any of the claims made. He said this in the flat, careful tone of a man constructing a legal framework around something that had no legal framework, building walls of official language to contain something that official language could not hold. Jesse was taken to Cascade Valley Hospital for a medical examination. The attending physician, a man named Dr. James Davis, documented his findings over 2 pages of handwritten notes. Jesse was malnourished by conventional standards, but not critically so. His muscle development was extraordinary for a 14-year-old, consistent with years of sustained physical activity at high intensity. His feet were heavily calloused, the skin thickened to a degree that Dr. Davis described as almost leathery, and his toenails were overgrown and deformed from years without shoes. He had multiple healed fractures in his left forearm and 3 ribs on his right side, all of which had healed cleanly without medical intervention. His body temperature was 101.3 degrees, which Dr. Davis attributed to low-grade infection, though no infection was found. His heart rate was 42 beats per minute. His blood pressure was normal. His reflexes were heightened to a degree that startled the doctor, who noted that Jesse flinched at stimuli before they were delivered, as if he could sense the reflex hammer moving before it struck. The blood work was where things got complicated. Jesse's basic panel came back mostly normal, with a few values that Dr. Davis flagged as unusual but not alarming. His red blood cell count was elevated. His hemoglobin concentration was high, 17.8 grams per deciliter, against a normal range of 14 to 18 for an adult male, notable in a 14-year-old. His white blood cell differential showed an atypical distribution, with an elevated percentage of a cell type the lab couldn't precisely categorize. Dr. Davis ordered additional testing, but the hospital's lab lacked the equipment for the kind of specialized analysis that would have revealed what Christine Allen's lab would not discover for another 3 decades in a retired power lineman 200 miles to the north, that the anomalies in Jesse's blood were not pathological, they were ancestral. But that discovery was decades away. In October of 1982, Jesse was a recovered missing child with a story no one in an official capacity was prepared to believe, and the machinery of the system that is designed to handle such cases ground forward with its usual indifference to the extraordinary. Jesse was placed in foster care while our mother was contacted in Olympia, and the legal process of restoring parental custody was initiated. He was enrolled in school. He was assigned a therapist, a psychologist from Everett named Dr. William Hall, who specialized in childhood trauma and who met with Jesse twice a week for the next 2 years. I know what Dr. Hall concluded because I read his notes years later after Jesse gave me permission. Hall believed Jesse was telling the truth, or at least Jesse's truth. He wrote that Jesse showed none of the typical markers of fabrication, no inconsistencies across repeated tellings, no rehearsed quality to his narratives, no signs of coaching or suggestion. He wrote that Jesse's account was either a genuine description of lived experience or the most elaborate and internally consistent delusion he had encountered in 20 years of practice. He noted that the physical evidence, the calloused feet, the healed fractures, the muscle development, the dietary markers in Jesse's blood work was consistent with prolonged wilderness survival, and that the emotional texture of Jesse's descriptions, particularly his account of the matriarch, suggested a genuine attachment bond, not a trauma response. Hall's professional recommendation delivered to the court in a sealed report, was that Jesse's account should not be dismissed, and that further investigation into the circumstances of his disappearance and return was warranted. The court acknowledged the recommendation and took no action. Jesse's case was closed. Our mother came back from Olympia. She rented a small house on the south side of Darrington and tried to rebuild something resembling a family. Jesse moved in with her. I stayed with the Palmers, a decision that was practical rather than emotional, but that felt to me like a second separation. I visited every weekend. Jesse and I rebuilt our relationship slowly, two boys who shared a face and a birthday, but no longer shared a frame of reference for understanding the world. Jesse was different. Of course he was different. You don't spend 7 years living in the wilderness with a non-human species and come back the same person you were when you left. But the difference wasn't damage exactly, it was orientation. Jesse related to the world from a perspective that human society didn't accommodate. He struggled in school, not because he lacked intelligence, but because the structure of a classroom, the fluorescent lights, the closed windows, the artificial temperature, the constant noise of 30 bodies in an enclosed space overwhelmed his senses in ways his classmates couldn't understand. He would leave class without explanation and stand outside with his face turned toward the tree line, breathing deeply, recalibrating. Teachers called it defiance. It was survival. He had abilities that he tried to hide and mostly succeeded. His hearing was sharper than anyone I knew. He could detect approaching footsteps from extraordinary distances, and he always knew who was coming before they arrived, identifying people by the pattern of their walk. His sense of smell was refined to a degree that was difficult to comprehend. He told me once that every person had a unique scent signature that was as distinct as a fingerprint, and that he could track a person through a building by smell the way a dog tracks a scent through a field. But the most unsettling ability was the one he called listening. The thing he had described to me on the riverbank the night before he disappeared. He could detect the infrasonic vocalizations of the creatures in the forest from miles away. He could stand on the porch of our mother's house and tell me whether they were near or far, how many there were, what they were doing. "They're moving east," he would say. 3 of them, 2 adults, 1 juvenile. "They're following the elk." And I would stand beside him and hear nothing but wind and rain and the ordinary sounds of a small town at the edge of an extraordinary wilderness. I asked Jesse once if he wanted to go back. We were 16, sitting on a log at the edge of the Stillaguamish River, watching steelhead hold in the current. Matriarch returned him. She kept something. He said that when the matriarch returned him, she kept something. He said that when the matriarch returned him, she kept something. He said that when the matriarch returned him, she kept something. He said that when the matriarch returned him, she kept something. He said that when the matriarch returned him, she kept something. He said that when the matriarch returned him, she kept something. He said that when the matriarch returned him, she kept something. He said that when the matriarch returned him, she kept something. He said that when the matriarch returned him, she kept something. He said that when the matriarch returned him, she kept something. He said that when the matriarch returned him, she kept something. He said that when the matriarch returned him, she kept something. He said that when the matriarch returned him, she kept something. He said that when the matriarch returned him, she kept something. He said that when the matriarch returned him, she kept something. He said that when the matriarch returned him, she kept something. He said that when the matriarch returned him, she kept something. He said that when the matriarch returned him, she kept something. He said that when the matriarch returned him, she kept something. He said that when the matriarch returned him, she kept something. He said that when the matriarch returned him, she kept something. He said that when the matriarch returned him, she kept something. He said that when the matriarch returned him, she kept something. He said that when the matriarch returned him, she kept something. He said that when the matriarch returned him, she kept something. He said that when the matriarch returned him, she kept something. He said that when the matriarch returned him, she kept something. He said that when the matriarch returned him, she kept something. He said that when the matriarch returned him, she kept something. He said that when the matriarch returned him, she kept something. He said that when the matriarch returned him, she kept something. He said that when the matriarch returned him, she kept something. He said that when the matriarch returned him, she kept something. He said that when the matriarch returned him, she kept something. He said that when the matriarch returned him, she kept something. He said that when the matriarch returned him, she kept something. He said that when the matriarch returned him, she kept something. He said that when the matriarch returned him, she kept something. He said that when the matriarch returned him, she kept something. He said that when the matriarch returned him, she kept something. He said that when the matriarch returned him, she kept something. He said that when the matriarch returned him, she kept something. He said that when the matriarch returned him, she kept something of his and left something of hers. And the exchange was not physical, but was real nonetheless. And the part of him that remained in the forest was the part that could hear the humming and feel the pull and understand, in a way that no human language could express, that the line between human and other was not a line at all, but a gradient, a spectrum, a continuum that he existed on somewhere in between. He said the reason she returned him, and not me, was because I didn't carry the frequency. I was fully human, or close enough that whatever trace of their genetics existed in our family line had not activated in me. In Jesse, it had.
He was a bridge between two species, and the matriarch had recognized this, and she had taken him in to nurture the part of him that belonged to her kind, and she had returned him to nurture the part that belonged to mine. He said the choice, her choice, had not been about keeping one twin and discarding the other. It had been about recognizing that only one of us could survive in her world, and only one of us needed to. Jesse was the message. I was the recipient. He was the experience. I was the witness. Our separation was not a tragedy, he said. It was a distribution of purpose. I did not fully accept this interpretation. I'm not sure I accept it now, more than 4 decades later. But I understood, listening to Jesse that afternoon by the river, that whatever had happened to him in the forest had given him a perspective on existence that I could not access, and that arguing with it would be like arguing with a person who had been to a country I would never visit about the customs of the people who lived there. Jesse graduated from high school in 1986. He got a job with the National Park Service working as a backcountry ranger in North Cascades National Park, a position that seemed almost cruelly appropriate, like the universe had a dark sense of humor about placing the boy who had been raised by forest creatures back into the forest in an official capacity. He was brilliant at it. He knew the backcountry the way most people know their own living room. He could navigate without a map in conditions that would disorient experienced mountaineers. He could predict weather by reading the movement of birds and the behavior of insects. He found lost hikers with a speed and accuracy that his supervisors attributed to exceptional tracking skills, and that Jesse attributed to the fact that he could smell a human being from a considerable distance, particularly a scared human being, because fear has a specific chemical signature that the sweat glands broadcast like a radio signal. He never married. He had relationships, brief ones, with women who were drawn to his quiet intensity and eventually pushed away by his inability to be fully present inside 4 walls. He lived alone in a cabin outside the park boundary, on land that backed onto the same wilderness he'd lived in as a child, and I believe, though he never confirmed this directly, that he maintained contact with the group that had raised him. There were nights when I visited his cabin and found it empty, the door unlocked, his boots by the stove, and in the morning he would be there, barefoot on the porch with coffee, his clothes damp and his hair tangled, and he would say he'd gone for a walk, and neither of us would pretend that this was what had actually happened.
Jesse died on March 14, 2018. He was 50 years old. He was found on a ridge above the Cascade River drainage, sitting against the base of a Douglas fir, his legs extended in front of him and his hands resting on his thighs. A Park Service colleague who found him said, "Jesse looked peaceful," which is a thing people always say about the dead, but in this case was apparently and unusually true. The medical examiner in Snohomish County determined the cause of death was cardiac arrest. His heart, which had beaten at 42 beats per minute for as long as anyone had measured it, simply stopped. There was no blockage, no disease, no structural abnormality. It stopped the way a clock stops when its mechanism has completed its allotted cycles. The medical examiner called it idiopathic sudden cardiac death, which is the medical profession's way of saying the heart stopped, and we have no idea why. I drove to the site where they found him. I drove to the trailhead, and then I walked 6 miles up the Cascade drainage, and then another mile up a steep ridge, following directions from the ranger who had recovered Jesse's body. When I reached the spruce where he had been sitting, I found something that the recovery team had either missed or chosen not to mention. Around the base of the tree, in a rough circle, the ground was marked with impressions. Deep, heavy impressions in the damp soil, foot-shaped but far too large to be human, and there were many of them, overlapping, concentrated, as if a group of very large beings had stood around that tree for an extended period, hours maybe longer. And on the bark of the spruce, at a height of about 7 feet, something had been carved or scraped into the wood. Not letters, not symbols I recognized, but marks, deliberate marks, a series of horizontal lines of varying length, scored into the bark with something that left deep, clean gouges. A message, written in a language I could not read, but whose meaning I felt in my chest, with a certainty that bypassed my brain entirely. Grief. The marks expressed grief. I knew this the way Jesse had known the humming, not through the ears, but through some deeper instrument, some resonance that existed in my cells, even though I was supposedly the twin who didn't carry the frequency. They came to him. When Jesse's heart stopped, when he sat down against that tree and left this world, they came to him. They stood around him. They marked the tree. They mourned. I sat against that spruce and put my hand on the bark and felt the grooves of their marks under my fingers, and I stayed there until the light was gone and the forest was dark and the stars appeared in the narrow strip of sky visible through the canopy above me. I listened, not with my ears, with my chest, the way Jesse taught me, the way he learned from them. And I heard it for the first time in my life, faint and far away, so deep it was less a sound than a pressure change. I heard the humming, coming from somewhere up the drainage, somewhere high and remote and lightless, a sustained low frequency that resonated in my sternum and made my eyes water and carried inside it something that was not words but was unmistakably language, unmistakably meaning, unmistakably the sound of something ancient and alive and intelligent, acknowledging a loss that crossed the boundary between their world and mine. I am 58 years old. I live in Everett, Washington, about an hour from Darrington, in a house with a view of the Cascades rising to the east and the Puget Sound lowlands to the west. I work as a carpenter. I have a wife named Lisa and a daughter named Donna, named for the woman who opened her door to a wild boy in animal hides on a rainy October afternoon in 1982. My daughter is 26. She does not carry the frequency. I tested this in the way Jesse taught me, by taking her to the forest as a child and watching to see if she turned toward sounds I couldn't hear. She didn't. The trait, whatever it was, has not passed to the next generation through my line. If it persists at all, it persists in Jesse's unwritten legacy, in whatever genetic material he may have contributed during his years of walking the boundary between human settlement and wilderness. I have never told this story publicly. Jesse asked me not to while he was alive, and I honored that. He said that the world was not ready to know what he knew, and that revealing it would put them at risk. Not the creatures themselves, who were too clever and too careful and too deeply embedded in their wilderness to be found by anyone they didn't choose to reveal themselves to, but the idea of them, the mystery, the possibility. Jesse said that the moment the world had proof, the moment the question of whether they existed was definitively answered, something precious would be lost. Not the creatures, the wondering, the humility that comes from not knowing everything. The space in the human mind where mystery lives and where it does its most important work, which is reminding us that we are not the only story being told on this earth. I'm telling it now because Jesse is gone, and the promise I made was to him, not to posterity. And because last winter I drove up to the Sauk, to the stretch of river where we camped in 1975, and I walked the bank to the spot where Jesse's footprints had crossed into the forest alongside those knuckle print depressions that no official report ever mentioned. And I stood there in the cold rain and felt something I had been denying myself permission to feel for 51 years. I felt that the forest was not empty, that what took my brother was still out there, still walking the deep valleys and the high ridges, still humming in frequencies that human ears weren't built to hear, but that certain human hearts with the right inheritance, the right resonance, could feel. Jesse was returned because he was loved. He was taken because he was recognized. He was kept because something in him belonged to something older and stranger and more persistent than the world that built the roads and the mills and the houses that Jesse could never quite feel at home in. And I was left because I was the other kind of twin, the one who would stay in the human world and carry the story and wait for decades, if necessary, until the time came to tell it. That time is now. I have told it. Whether you believe it is your decision, and I respect whatever you decide. But before you dismiss it, before you file it under campfire tales and rural folklore and the overactive imaginations of people who spend too much time in the woods, I want you to consider one thing. In 1975, two twin brothers walked into the Mount Baker Snoqualmie National Forest, and something chose between them. Something detected a difference that no human eye could see, a genetic distinction buried in the DNA of one brother and absent from the other, and it made the right choice. It chose the one who could survive in its world. It chose the one who carried the bridge in his blood. And 43 years later, it came to mourn him when he died. Monsters don't mourn. Animals don't carve grief into the bark of a tree. Only something with a mind and a memory and a capacity for love does that. Only something that recognizes the weight of a life and feels its absence when it ends. My name is Billy Clark. My twin brother Jesse was taken from a riverbank on the Sauk in August of 1975 and returned to a doorstep in Darrington in October of 1982. He lived the rest of his life on the edge of two worlds, belonging fully to neither, carrying in his body and his senses the inheritance of a species that the world refuses to acknowledge. He died on a ridge above the Cascade River, alone by human measure but attended by beings who loved him in their way, which from everything Jesse told me was deeper and more enduring and more honest than most of the love the human world has to offer. The Red Cross would have rejected Jesse's blood if he'd ever tried to give it. His blood didn't conform to the catalog. It carried something extra, something ancient, something that came from the deep forest and the old lines and the humming that you can feel in your chest if you're quiet enough and still enough and willing enough to admit that you might not be the only intelligence listening. I miss my brother. I miss him the way you miss a part of yourself that has been removed, not with sharp grief, but with the constant low-grade awareness of absence, the phantom sensation of a limb that is no longer there but whose nerves still fire. I go to the forest and I stand in the rain and I listen with my chest, the way he taught me, and sometimes, very rarely, when the conditions are right and the wind is still and the world is quiet enough for the deep sounds to travel, I hear it, the humming, faint and far, rising from the valleys and the drainages and the places where the trees are so old that they remember a time before roads, before mills, before any of us were here. I hear it, and I know that Jesse is part of it now, not gone, translated, carried forward in the sounds that the forest makes when no one is listening, when almost no one is listening, when only the ones who carry the right frequency, the right inheritance, the right ache in their chest, are standing still enough to hear what has always been there, singing in the spaces between the trees, in a voice that sounds, if you are very still and very lucky, and very much Jesse Clark's twin brother, like home.